You may have heard that the United States won the Women's World Cup. This is great news. Congratulations to the soccer team. You guys played really, really well, and everybody in America is really, really happy. But there is a controversy growing around the winnings. Because apparently the women's soccer team isn't paid the same amount as the men. And this is a really great example of how often social justice arguments are actually completely wrong and inverted. I guess the best way to put it is inverted, because it turns out women actually are paid more than men. See, here's what they do. They take the average, game earnings per player of the men and the women, and then say, if the women are only making like $3,000 and the men are making 5, therefore the men are making more. However, when you actually break it down business to business, recognizing that they're two separate businesses, you realize the women are paid a higher percentage of revenue than the men are. It's okay. Listen, if I had a coffee shop and there was another coffee shop across the street and they're not the same business and one shop makes more money, then yeah, they pay their employees more. But in this instance, the women are getting paid a higher percentage, but they want even more money, even though their company doesn't make it. Well, let's read the story and break down what's actually going on. This story by Human Events. There should be equal pay for the World Cup. That means paying men more. Interesting, eh? They say the United States women's soccer team just won the FIFA Women's World Cup against the Netherlands. The left was more ecstatic over this than they were during the 4th of July. The crowd traded a USA chant for one saying equal pay. The soccer equal pay controversy began making headlines in March when 28 of the U.S. women's team sued the United States Soccer Federation over institutionalized gender discrimination. The 28 include the team's leading players. There is no pay gap in soccer, no doubt. But to the dismay of social justice warriors, they have incorrectly identified the victim of the skewed pay. It is in fact men who are not earning their fair share comparatively. So there is a pay gap. But I'll say this. Women's soccer and men's soccer, completely different businesses that bring in different amounts of money. So what they're essentially saying is that even though women are making a higher percentage relative to the amount of revenue generated by the business, they want the men's team to effectively subsidize the women. Essentially pay the women out of the earnings, the revenue from the men. That's also not fair. Plain and simple. Let's read on. Leading up to the Women's World Cup, and especially now that the U.S. has secured the win, the pay gap conversation has snowballed into one that grabbed the attention of Congress. Over 50 legislators signed a letter addressing this supposed institutionalized gender discrimination. Amongst the legislators is Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, who stated, "The women make just as much of a sacrifice, put in just as much mental and physical energy, absorb just as much risk of injury as the men who play for our national team. Yet, when you break it down, a women's national soccer team player earns a base salary of $3,600 per game, while a men's player earns $5,000. Now, I want to stop here because I heard that the men actually play more games. I don't know if it's true. I'm not a big soccer fan, but one of the things that was going around is that men play like 3 of 5 and women play like 2 of 3 or something like that. I don't know, but that essentially men will play more games, and thus not only are men getting paid less relative to the revenue of men's soccer, but they're actually doing more work. So that's really unfair, right? Well, let's read on. They say, the Huffington Post threw out some numbers commonly used to propagate the pay gap myth. They reported U.S. Soccer's women's salary are approximately $30,000 less than the men, in addition to earning smaller bonuses. They say, U.S. Soccer awarded the men's team a $5.4 million bonus after it lost in the round of 16 at the 2014 World Cup. It awarded the women's team $1.7 million when it won the entire 2015 tournament. But when you figure revenue into the equation, the money that drives the financial reward, the math does not add up. They say, Forbes' Mike Ozanian helped set the record straight when the lawsuit was first filed. Referencing the Women's World Cup in Vancouver 4 years ago, Ozanian said, the Women's World Cup brought in almost $73 million, of which the players got 13%. The 2010 Men's World Cup in South Africa made almost $4 billion, of which 9% went to the players. In yesterday's World Cup, participating teams received over 22% of the revenue, whereas men only received 7% of the revenue in last year's World Cup in Russia. Women are actually earning over 3 times more than men. But I will tell you what, when you don't understand basic math, they don't seem to realize. They look at the simple number. Hey, I got paid, $10 today, and that guy got paid $20. The job is different, okay? If your company sells chocolate ice cream and my company sells asparagus ice cream and you make more money, what do you expect? I can't go and complain it's not fair, they're making more money than me. Well, dude, they're selling a product that people like more than yours. What are you going to do about it? Sorry, there's nothing you can do about it. Could you imagine if we actually ran businesses that way? Like, listen, we know that you're a chocolate ice cream shop, but we're going to take a portion of your revenue and give it to the asparagus ice cream shop because we feel they should be allowed to make more money. If people don't want it and they don't buy it, the money's not there. However, in the end, we can see that the women are getting a higher percentage based on their revenue. So yes, if I'm selling if I'm selling a crappier product, I shouldn't say crappier product. Look, great athletes, women's team, great job, okay, but less people want to go see it. What are you going to do about it? If people don't want to give you money, then there's less money to go around. But even still, they're paying you a higher percentage. I think they're doing all right, but let's read on. They write, because the men's World Cup made north of $6 billion, that 7% equates to $400 million for the teams. The women's World Cup earned around $130 million, so the 22% is only $30 million. They're getting 22% versus men's 7%. Mind-blowing, huh? Not only has the wrong victim of skewed pay been identified, but the wrong motive as well. The gap has nothing to do with institutionalized gender discrimination and everything to do with fewer people wanting to watch women's soccer. An LA Times opinion editorial said, the U.S. women's soccer team outperforms the men's team when it comes to victories, domestic viewership, name recognition, and general awesomeness. I don't know what that means. Its members are stars, consistently ranked number 1 in the world, and they make millions of dollars for their employer, the U.S. Soccer Federation. Yes, the U.S. women's soccer team is ranked number 1 internationally in women's sports, but it still doesn't hold a candle to the men. The men's World Cup in Russia generated over 45 times the revenue of yesterday's women's World Cup. Why so much more? Have you ever watched women's soccer? So let's take this top. Let's go back a second and point this out. They outperform the men's team in terms of victories. Doesn't change the fact that internationally less money goes into women's soccer. They are winning more against women's teams, but it doesn't mean there's any more money. So that's not outperforming. It's just, I guess you could call it outperforming, but it doesn't translate to actually having the money to pay them. In fact, I'm pretty sure if they paid the men the same amount, the company wouldn't work. There would be no business because the men are getting 9% or 7% of the net revenue generated. If you were going to give that same percentage or that same flat number, that's what more, that's, listen, plain and simple. The men's team made, the men's World Cup made $6 billion, okay? And the men got $400 million. The women's World Cup earned nearly 30% of what the men's actually got paid. Meaning, if you were going to take $400 million and give it to the teams, you're negative. You're negative $270 million, okay? The money doesn't even exist to pay women the same amount. So they go on to say a team entirely made up of adolescent males beat the U.S. women's national team 5-2 in a scrimmage that was supposed to tune up the women's team prior to their game against Russia 2 years back. People opt to watch the fast-paced, more aggressive gender. It is simply more exciting. Until this changes, which it won't, the tournament revenue imbalance is not going away. Equal pay means paying men and women the same percentage of their respective tournaments' revenue. Men deserve to compete for the same percentage of revenue they generate as women do. To fix the pay gap, we either need to pay men more or women less. Plain and simple. I will say it in no uncertain terms because there's going to be a ton of arguing and the left is going to be like, equal pay. Okay, plain and simple. The amount of money paid to men that you want is almost 3 times, is just over 3 times the amount the entire Women's World Cup earned, period. Okay? There is quite literally not enough money to actually pay them in the same flat rate. But I'll tell you this, to end this video, women receive a higher percentage of revenue than men do. We're done. I got more segments coming up in a few minutes. I will see you shortly.